Hello and welcome all here to this review of part of the latest DLC for Total War Warhammer 3 Shadows of Change. This video will be focusing on the Deceivers faction, so let's not faff about anymore, let's just get straight into this inky blue madness of the Lord of Change and his latest offering in the form of the Deceivers. They're led by the enigmatic Changeling. I have no idea what the third arm is all about, but he does have a sense of style about him, that's for sure. The Changeling leads the Deceivers faction, who start right smack bang in the middle of Empire territory in both Immortal Empires and the Realms of Chaos campaigns. The first major difference you'll find here is the way that his campaign works for this boy in blue. The Deceivers don't actually control any territory. Despite having forces who move around the map, the Changeling presumably just disguises his entire army as a troupe of musicians or perhaps circus performers as they move around the map, remaining hidden in enemy territory that they have any building chains in. But ultimately, as an agent of change, you need to be able to move about and enact your schemes, so settlement management isn't something that the Changeling is all that concerned with. Better to leave that to the admin, Kevin, the trickster cult boy. But Rocket, you twisted advocate of change, you. How does a faction have building chains without any territory? I hear you say. Well, when you attack a settlement and defeat the garrison, you then have the option to create a trickster cult in the settlement, which will become your new building chain, allowing you to train units, expand your economy, and unlock new troop types, all the usual stuff. One thing though you have to be careful of is discoverability, which increases if you build too many obvious giant blue bird worshipping cult members here type buildings. Well, that and all the blue-robed people going about constantly contradicting themselves and trying to catch each other out with plans within plans. If a chain is discovered, the AI will work to remove your cult, and then you'll have to establish another one, either by attacking it, but you can also recruit a trickster cult agent who can establish them in a far less violent way, and is definitely more in keeping with Tzeentch's SOP. But what is the Changeling up to in his campaign? Well, of course, he's working toward the ultimate scheme. His ultimate scheme, though, requires a bit of groundwork to get ready. And this means you have to complete subsets of smaller schemes around the entire world map to unlock the ultimate scheme. This feature's my favourite. Opening the scheme screen, you can see lots of objectives to achieve in each region of the world map, and what needs to be done to complete the main scheme in that region. Once you've finished that main scheme, you effectively weaken your opponents when you finally enact the ultimate scheme, and potentially gain some allies along the way, depending on which ones are completed. Think of it as an old world road trip, as the Changeling takes his forces across the map in a hilarious set of set-piece battles, tricksy misdirects and treasure-hunting misadventures. Honestly, it's my favourite part of the DLC, and one that I'll probably come back to multiple times. But let's take a closer look at the Changeling himself. As his name suggests, he can shapeshift into any legendary lord or legendary hero in the game, and that isn't just a fancy skin, by the way. He actually gains their stats and abilities on the field, and new forms can be unlocked during a campaign by completing tasks and objectives, making him one of the most versatile legendary lords in terms of flexibility. Depending on who you're fighting, you can then tailor his form to counter certain foes. This will of course mean he loses his normal skills, which we'll cover in a little bit, but proper planning can produce impressive results on the battlefield. His faction effects make him immune to diplomatic penalties for trespassing, establishing trickster cults instead of occupying territory. He can replenish and recruit in foreign territory, and armies are hidden in regions with trickster cult buildings. Hiding in plain sight is a powerful tool in a campaign and can take the pressure off you, since you don't need to worry about being besieged, though it might mean you might want to prevent certain settlements from being destroyed by other factions, or any that you've conquered, since you might have invested a lot of resources into them and don't want all those snacky unlocks to then be wiped out. Cult buildings can be expanded through cult supplies, which look like stacks of books, so presumably this cult runs the largest chain of W.H. Smiths the old world's ever seen, with increased income being provided by certain building chains and completing schemes, with your technology chains also increasing your supply per turn as well. You also have grimoires, which act as a resource to perform your good old changing of the ways actions, and for just general research purposes. These are earned through very simple objectives like victory in battle and establishing cults alongside other means like building certain chains and research. But let us get into the meaty part of the DLC, the new lords and units for Tzeentch. These come in a few forms, ranging from heroes to troops to beasts from beyond the veil of time and space or something. Of course, we'll kick off with the Changeling himself, or itself, or herself, or whatever they feel like being at that particular point in time. The Changeling is primarily a spellcaster, with the barrier buff that all Tzeentch troops have, and has access to the Lore of Tzeentch spell list. His ability, Formless Horror, allows him to transform into any legendary lord or legendary hero in the game, though they can only have one form per battle, so don't go thinking you can just freely switch between the entire roster in a single fight, since that would be a nightmarish load-wise on the game and your PC, no doubt. His other ability, Deceiving Shadows, creates a copy of him that acts like the regular Changeling, but cannot damage enemy troops, but it does work well to distract a tough opponent for a time, or to stop any charging cavalry troops who are about to run him down. His passives consist of Siege Attacker, for gates, Causes Fear, Encourages Troops, Hides in Forests, he's demonic, giving him physical resistances, immune to terror and unbreakable. His Fires of Change passive will give him 11% damage resistance, triggering when he casts a spell affecting allies in the same range as him, acting as a ward save in an AoE, and his Cowled and Cloaked passive gives him an extra 10% bonus resistance if the Winds of Magic are currently 15 or greater. It's all very complex. Of course though, it can't all be blue and purple rainbows. The Changeling, being a demon, does suffer the same damage over time debuffs that others will suffer when their leadership starts to drop, stacking with each stage. Also, being a wizard, any melee combat can be pretty bad for him, unless he turns into a melee lord, but then you lose all of those passives I just mentioned. He can't equip any mounts, and his speed is rather limited, making him vulnerable to fast-moving lords and heroes, or just high-tier monsters and cavalry. Also, if his barrier is broken, he has to rely on his armour to protect him, which is pretty low at 35 points, meaning Focus Fire can quickly melt the Changeling if a player gets engaged in positions with troops all around him. That said though, he is very unique and quite fun as an addition to the roster of Legendary Lords, and one I think many will enjoy playing. But what is a Warhammer DLC without some new faceless goons to throw into the maelstrom of battle? Of course, for this we have the Zangos, a Tzeentch-touched beastman essentially, with some quirks that make them stand out a bit more compared to their regular beastman brethren. Zangos are shielded axe infantry with vanguard deployment, and it makes them pretty good at taking the front line quickly and then fixing the enemy in place thanks to their extra shielding from barrier. Zangor attacks are also magical, which is pretty handy for overcoming certain damage reduction thanks to their Mark of Tzeentch. Add in a sprinkle of Primal Fury, giving them a 10% speed and charge buff, alongside melee attack buffs and immunity to psychology when their leadership is over 50%. They also gain a rather nasty base weapon and armor piercing buff that stacks up to 20% when friendly heroes and lords are casting spells near to them. Overall then, Zangors are a solid mid-tier infantry that can replace your Marauders before you unlock the tried and true Chaos of Warrior variants for your Blue Man group. Zangors shouldn't be ignored though after you unlock those boys in blue, since their armour is still pretty decent at 80 points, and with their buffs from nearby spellcasters and higher leadership, they can take a lot of hits and dish out pain in equal measure. Overall, a solid addition to the roster, I say. Over in the hero pile, we have two new additions for the Tzeentch crew. The first is the Bookworm Duo of the Blue Scribes. These spellcasters are obsessed with detailing every single spell cast in the world and furiously scribbling down new scripts for Disney Plus in their downtime, which might explain some of the quality of the writing. Naturally though, being a couple of blue horrors, they have the barrier effect to give them extra hit points, but have a rather interesting quirk called Scrolls of Sorcery, which acts like a kind of Mario Kart item pickup whenever they cast a spell. Essentially, their entire spell list randomizes every time they cast a spell, and this is limited to their only known spell list luckily, but it does mean you have to choose carefully which spell you're going to cast, because it might not be there afterwards. A bit of randomness though perfectly encapsulates the nature of Tzeentch. Passive abilities allow them to cause fear, they encourage nearby troops, they can fire on the move and have a 20% physical resistance buff. The same demonic buffs as well apply here, as well as Spell Siphon. This passive will grant them a buff to their spell mastery whenever a friendly unit casts a spell, up to a 20% maximum, similar to the Zangos with their melee attacks. With that said, the Blue Scribes have extremely low armor once their barrier is broken, meaning they will suffer a lot of damage quickly if they are targeted by ranged attacks. They do have high speed from their flying mount and the ability to hit from unexpected angles with this speed, but should they become engaged in any airborne melee combat, they will quickly be beaten down, since these boys are more deadly with the quill than they are with the blade. Your best use of these two then is to keep them back at first, see how the battle is going to play out, and use their best spell to open their offensive with before settling in for some nasty ranged attack damage, which by the way causes magical fire damage with a missile strength of 313. Very tasty indeed. But not every hero of Tzeentch is some nerd with their head in a book. No, some heroes of Tzeentch like to enact their schemes through physical combat, and this is where Acold Hellbrass comes in. Outside of having a name that immediately screams evil villain from birth, Acold is a armoured sword-wielding hero unit, benefiting from the barrier ability. He has two active abilities while on the field. The first is Thorn's Aura, which is a hex that reduces the leadership and speed of enemies within a 35 meter radius of him, useful for breaking the foe quicker and then chasing them down afterwards. The Windblade, which is not a geisha transformer, is a magical missile attack that he can fling from his sword, doing 500 damage with 30% of that damage being armor piercing. It does also have the secondary effect of exploding, which causes an extra 144 damage, and can also be flung away from his sword 150 meters, spawning as a vortex. Acold can also hide in forests, encourages nearby troops, and is basically immune to all psychology. His high armor combined with good leadership means he can hold his own for extended periods during battle, and make him ideal for dueling enemy heroes or lords. Even if he can't kill them, he can hold them up for a decent amount of time. His melee attacks are magical, and his weapon strength can punch through armor while also having a bonus against infantry he's engaged with. Probably his main drawback here is his slow speed and average melee defense, and rather oddly, he doesn't get any options for a mount, not even a Chaos Horse. Chaos is all about the monsters, and this DLC brings new beasts in the form of the Cockatrice and the Mutalith Vortex Beast. The Cockatrice, though, is a flying monster that causes terror and benefits from that beautiful blue barrier of Tzeentch. As a giant petrifying monster, they can attack gates during sieges, they can cause fear and terror, and have a natural 25% missile resistance. The one unique element of the Cockatrice, like any Cockatrice in a fantasy novel or game, is their ability to petrify their foes. Sadly though, this ability doesn't actually turn units into statues on the field, which would have been a cool touch visually. Instead, it has a permanent AoE hex in a 35 meter radius that reduces the melee attack and speed of enemies by 10 points and 10% respectively. It's just as well really that it gets that 25% missile resistance buff because it has comparatively low armor combined with being a rather massive blue chicken. It can be easily shot by enemy skirmishers as it flies around to slow people down a bit. That speed, however, is useful, as it allows it to flank at the start of a battle and hit troops in the squishy rear parts. Cockatrice attacks cause poison as well, as being magical, so they can actually be quite debilitating to any mid-tier infantry and even some higher-tier troops with its high armor-piercing stat. Really, it's more of a support beast, best deployed to shore up the weak spots in the line or to get into the melee with tougher troops to help debuff those enemies and ensure that they break quicker. Alone it's pretty mediocre, but kept with a dedicated troop it can actually be a real terror. And finally we have the Mutalith Vortex Beast, a creature many fans of Warhammer will be familiar with both the Old World and 40k tabletop. This chaos monstrosity causes terror, can destroy gates, causes fear and terror, and has a whole bunch of AoE effects due to its frankly bizarre nature. Gift of Mutation will grant friendly units a +8 melee attack bonus continuously in a 35 meter radius of the beast. Aura of Mutation, however, constantly damages enemy units in the same radius for 12 to 24 damage a second when it's actively engaged in the melee. Finally then, Tides of Transformation is a passive direct damage ability that explodes in a 12 meter radius, doing 9 damage per second for 32 seconds. This ability will activate every 30 seconds after casting, and units in contact with the Great Mutalith Beast will be hit with Disoriented, reducing their melee defense by 4, their attack by 6, and their speed by 30% for 22 seconds, and that's why Samoa Joe doesn't have a chance of winning the TNA title at Lockdown, because there's no way he can be on Scott Steiner's level. Anyway, all of these abilities then combine with a high hit point monster that can romp into the main line of the melee, create actual havoc. Its attacks are magical and armor piercing with a bonus against large units. Add in a decent leadership stat and you have a very effective tier 5 unit that can augment the front line, debuff the enemy front line, and rack up kills like no tomorrow. Of course, the creature will become top priority in any multiplayer battle, so expect that to be quickly targeted for annihilation. Given its size and its slower speed, it can be easily caught out in the open before it can really properly engage your troops. But that about covers the new Tzeentch Deceivers faction. And next time I will be covering Mother Ostankya and her new additions to the mighty forces of Kislev. So thanks for watching, everybody. I will catch you all next time. Have a good week, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.